Welcome to The Car Flip Show. My name's Justin. I was a part-time flipper turned full-time used car dealer. This show is all about teaching you how to buy and sell cars for profit. Thanks so much for listening. Let's get into the episode. This is episode 13 of The Car Flip Show. Thanks so much for being along for the ride today. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at a tool that you can use to get dents out of vehicles. It's a suction cup. I'll be talking about that in a moment, as well as my story. We're going to be looking at how I got from my first flip, which actually wasn't a car, to where I am today owning and operating a fully functional used car dealership. So before we get into that, I'm going to be talking about a suction cup tool. If you're on YouTube, you can see me holding it right now. This is one I bought at Harbor Freight. For those of you on the podcast, maybe you're on the treadmill right now, walking the dog, on the way to work, maybe you're at work, don't tell anyone. This is like a 4.5 inch, I think that's what it says, rubber piece on the bottom. It's attached to a handle. You probably just heard me release it. It has a release function that when you actuate it and you pull the handle in, it suctions to whatever you adhere it to. Now, it has to be something with a smooth texture. I've actually used this for my iMac. I had a power supply go bad inside my iMac. To replace that, I actually had to pull the screen off of it. So you had to suction 2 of these to the screen, pull the screen loose. It holds on, or it's held on by magnets, so it was helpful there. The premise of this with a vehicle is if you have a large dent, now this isn't going to work with a hail damage spot or a small dent. If it's a large dent like I have right now on the side of a 2004 Ford Ranger, where part of the bed was pushed in, I suctioned this to the bed, pulled the handle, and then kind of yanked on it. When you do that, hopefully the metal gives and you hear a clink and the metal releases to where it was previously. Now, you're not always going to make it perfect, but a lot of times you can make it better. So with this bed, it's probably going to cost $300 to fix the side of this bed. Unfortunately, it didn't come out as good as I would have wanted to, so I'm probably still going to have it painted. But I've had beds that have been pushed in similarly, or I've had fenders, or I've had quarter panels that have had a dent in them. A lot of times in a rear tailgate, like a pickup truck or a lift gate on a SUV, you'll have a dent. I've had times where I've suctioned this to it, pulled it, and it's come out completely perfect. Like you couldn't even tell. So very handy tool to have. I think they're like $5-10. We'll put a link to one that you can buy on Amazon. There is a pneumatic version of this that you can hook air to. It's about, I want to think 3 feet long. I've got one in the back. I used it on the Ranger as well. It still didn't help. Basically, it suctions air, so it gives you a little bit more adhesion, and it keeps you from having to push in. So if you are working on the side of a bed and you fix one spot and you want to go down a little bit to suction in, when you push in on that new section, you might then also push in on the section you fixed. So this allows you just to sit it on the metal, and then it suctions automatically with the air power. So we'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. You can check those out. Both the ones I have, I bought at Harbor Freight. So if there's a Harbor Freight nearby you, might be a decent place to check for these, because this is not that complex. A lot of tools, for something like a drill, that type of thing that you're going to be using a ton, go ahead and buy the good stuff. I use DeWalt, but for something like this, there's not much that can really go wrong. For $5, it's worth the drive up the road, unless you can find it cheaper on Amazon, of course. So that's the tool for today. Hopefully that can be helpful for you in the future. If you have something that has a good sized dent, you can pull it out using the suction cup. Next, we're going to look at my story and how I got to where I am today from my first flip. Now, I've talked about in other areas. We sent out an email not long ago talking about my story and trying to be helpful in showing people that you don't have to know a ton to get started, because when I got started, I had no idea what I was doing. My first flip actually wasn't a car. It wasn't anything car related. I was 8 or 9 years old. I was at the flea market with my grandma. The flea market was the highlight of my week. In the summers, I stayed with my grandma, so on Wednesdays, we went to the flea market. And there was 3 rows. I knew on the back row there was a guy that usually had pretty cool stuff. I ended up buying a Sega Genesis for $10. Like, I walk up, he's got the Sega Genesis, the box. I saw the Sega Genesis. I picked up, going through the cords and cables and the controllers. There's 5 games at the bottom. I still have a few of them. I think I still have Mortal Kombat, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Pitfall. I want to think there was a Monopoly game, but I still have those. I believe I have to check. Maybe we'll post a picture later of those games if I can find them. But anyway, I buy it for $10. He was asking $20. All I had on me that day was $10, and that $10 was burning a hole in my pocket. It was all I could do to not buy everything I saw. But $10 was a ton of money for me at the time. I don't even know how I had $10, but for whatever reason I did. I walk up, I say, how much? He says 20. I pull out the $10, kind of look at him like, this is all I have. And I think I said something like, "Can you take 10?" He says yes, hands me the box. I hand him the $10. As I'm walking to find my grandma to show her what I bought, a guy stops me and says, "Hey, where'd you find the Sega?" And I said, "Well, there's a guy in the back. He has the little stuff on the ground there." He said, "Did he have another one?" I say, "No, this was the last one." And he asked if I would be willing to sell it. Now, I hadn't bought it with the intentions to sell it. I just wanted to have a second Sega Genesis so I could keep it at my grandma's house so I didn't have to lug everything back and forth. But he says, "Would you be willing to sell it?" And I said, "Well, maybe." He says, "How much?" Now, this wasn't a well thought through plan. The guy that I was looking to buy it from had said 20. So in my mind, I was thinking 20. But I said 20 with the caveat that I wanted to keep the games. So that was the important part to me because I already had a Sega Genesis. For me, this would have been a second one that I could keep at my grandma's house. Wouldn't have to lug it. So he agreed. He pulled out 20 bucks, put it in my hand. I pulled the games out, gave him the box, and I just kind of stood there. I was honestly a little bit awestruck because I had no idea what had just happened. And I looked down at the $20. I look over at the games. I came to the flea market with $10. I now had a $20 bill, and I had 5 games, and I hadn't spent technically anything. I'd made $10. So I ran. I found my grandma. I was freaking out. Like, she's thinking I stole the game. She's like, "Where'd you get 20 bucks? I go home. I tell my parents. I show my dad. Everyone's excited, or at least pretends like they are. But for me, this was the biggest, most amazing thing I'd ever done in my whole life. I thought I was an amazing business person. For me in that moment, and with these times that I'm going to be talking about on my flipping journey, I'm just going to give you a little insight into what I learned in that moment. And in this moment, I learned that flipping was possible. Now, I'd seen my dad, he flipped cars as I was growing up, so I'd seen him do it. But for me to actually do it that first time, to go in with 10, to buy something and sell it, not even on purpose, and to make 10 bucks plus have extra games, it just let me know, okay, this is actually possible. And that turned into taking candy to school and selling it. That turned into going to the Dollar General, buying the 10 for 10 candy, selling it for 50 cents at camp. Except then I got shut down because I was undercutting the sales from the candy place at the camp. But, all kinds of things as a kid. I did baseball cards, all that stuff. It just showed me that it was possible. So that went through my childhood. I kept going to the flea market. I'd buy electronics, DVD players, cameras, video games, all kinds of stuff. When Amazon and eBay came about, that was a great place for me to not have to sell it, out of the back of my car, which I actually did for a little while. I would take my stuff into Chick-fil-A. People would say, "Hey, what do you got?" We'd open the trunk. They'd look at the video games and this and that. Got a few funny looks, but you got to do what you got to do. So from there, I went and actually was able to make my first vehicle purchase, which was a 1973 Beetle. Now, this Beetle wasn't in show quality. It was just decent. The 4 pans were rotted. It was yellow. Needed a little bit of work. I was able to clean the inside out pretty good, clean the outside. Driving it to church one night, and it catches on fire. Long story short, me and my brother jump out of the car. Guy comes by, helps us put the fire out. We have it towed home. I'm thinking total loss. I'm going to lose the $965 that I paid for this. And then what? Because that was all the money that I had. I was very fortunate that my dad ran into somebody that was looking for a Beetle that then came to look at mine. As they're looking at it, I'm thinking, these folks, there's no way they're going to want this. My dad walks up and says, "Would you take $2,000 for it?" And I flipped out. I said, of course. Tried to keep my cool. I'm watching, from a distance as my dad's talking to him. Walks back with $2,000 cash, puts it in my hand, and says, "Where's the title?" And so I went from basically $1,000 to making $2,000 on a car that caught on fire. And in that moment, I learned that sometimes you just get lucky. And that's continued. But the more that you put yourself out on a limb, the more that you work to better yourself, the more that things like that and the odds of them actually occurring happen. So this past week, I made $6,000 on a vehicle. That's a great sale. It was a vehicle that I only expected to make $4,500 on. I priced it a little high. I got lucky. That's actually where I got the Ford Ranger. A guy came in. I thought I was going to price it at $13,900, and I was only going to get $13,500. Just for fun, I put it at $14,950. Guy comes in, looks at it, loves it, asks if I take trades. I said sure. I offered him $1,000 for the car, for the truck that he had, which was a 2004 Ford Ranger with 130,000 miles. He said yes, so he gave me $13,950 cash plus his truck. I only expected to get $13,500, so I'm already doing better there. Plus, I get a free truck. Sometimes things just work out. Sometimes you can't explain it, but those things will only happen if you put yourself out there to actually achieve those things. So sometimes you're just going to get lucky, but you got to be ready for those things and take those things also with the bad. So from there, I flipped several more cars. Pontiac Grand Prix were kind of my thing back then. I did a ton of Pontiac Grand Prix. As I'm flipping cars, I'm also working at Chick-fil-A, and I think I worked like 20 hours a week during the school year and during the summer. In the summer, sometimes I would go up to 30 or so. But I started looking at my paycheck from Chick-fil-A, and then I'm looking at what I'm making on cars. And, starting out, I'd make $1,000, I'd make $1,400, I'd make $2,200, I'd make $1,500, and I would just kind of gradually growing and just learning along the way. But I started to look at my paychecks, which I think I was making $7 an hour, or $7 an hour at the time. And then, as taxes and all come out, if you do the math and you work 20 hours a week, that's not a ton of money. We got paid bi-weekly, which still wasn't a huge number on the check. Then I look at what I'm doing on the weekends, or I would leave Chick-fil-A, drive across the street. There was actually a Kmart, which is where I sat my cars for a while. I'd leave Chick-fil-A, I'd meet someone, I'd sell a car, and I'd make as much as I would make in working for an entire month, or sometimes a month and a half or 2 months on this one car sale. And so as I'm running the math in my head, I'm thinking, you know what? It doesn't make sense for me to be spending 20 or 30 hours a week over here, which if I was to put that time into what I actually enjoy, which is buying and selling cars, which is, the business-minded thing, instead of just mindlessly flipping chicken, putting them in bags, and then putting them out for people to buy, which was my job. I ran what they call the board. So when an order came up, I would see that you wanted no pickles. So I'd pull it out, put it in the bag with no pickles, put a no pickle sticker up there, throw it in the chute. That's great. If that's what you do and that's what you enjoy, definitely keep doing it. For me, it kind of became monotonous, especially when I'm thinking I can be doing so much bigger things if I would just take the leap to do without this paycheck. So I quit Chick-fil-A. I put all my time and effort into flipping cars. I also had an arrangement at the time with a junkyard that I could take interior parts out of the junkyard, sell them, and split the entire sale 50-50, which was an amazing thing at the time as a high school student. I could sell a seat for $400 on eBay. Well, normally a set would probably sell for $400. I'd get to keep $200 with absolutely no money invested, so that was a great thing that came about because I did quit Chick-fil-A. Actually, they would allow me to drive my pickup truck in the back. I could take the seats out with an impact gun. That took maybe, 30 minutes tops by the time I got out there, pulled it out. I'd go home, clean the seats, take pictures, put them on eBay, and then I would make money that way. So because I quit Chick-fil-A, because I started putting my time into what I enjoyed, which was the lesson that I learned, if you do what you enjoy and you're good at it, good things are going to come of it. So as I did that, more opportunities presented themselves for me from a car flipping standpoint, and then the eBay side business on top of my side business of flipping cars basically got established because I had the time to invest in that. So eventually, as I got into when I went to college, that phased out because they understood and eventually learned how to use eBay. But for me, it was a really great thing there for a while, pulling the seats out, having nothing invested, and making a ton of money selling parts on eBay. So I went from there and went to college. I was actually able to pay my full tuition to a pretty pricey college using the money that I was making buying and selling cars. So on campus, they gave you one sticker for your vehicle. They got really annoyed that I kept coming back to get new stickers, actually to the point where I just stopped doing that. I figured out how to make a copy of their sticker, which is a whole nother episode. Basically, you go to Walmart, you make a copy, double-sided tape, very easy to do. That also allowed me to keep more than one car on campus at one time. I would strategically place, they had a parking garage, I would park one in the parking garage, I would park one in my assigned space. I didn't get caught until close to graduating. Actually had a pretty big run-in with the head of campus police. Needless to say, we were on a first-name basis because I kept trying to hide it in other places, and they kept finding my cars that I was trying to flip. But that's another episode. But so I paid for my college doing that. Again, doing what I enjoyed. I would be sitting in class. College for me, I definitely learned things in college, but not a lot that I actually use today. Probably because as I was in class, I'd be on Craigslist. There wasn't Facebook Marketplace and all the stuff that there is today, but I'd be on Craigslist scanning through cars while everyone else was paying attention to the teacher. That was kind of what I learned in college, was how to scan Craigslist. But I was able to take that, pay for my college, which was a pretty great thing. So from there, right after college, I got married. First year to 2 years of marriage, I was flipping full time. So I went from college, having a lot more expenses, being that I was married, living on my own. We bought a house. Actually had a kid not too much after getting married. I think probably not much after 9-10 months after getting married. We have our first child. I am flipping cars the entire time, that first year into the second year. What I learned during that time frame, it kind of confirmed the theory of you can actually do what you enjoy. You can actually, do things that are fun, that are also profitable, and also make money doing it. So as I'm in college, certain people would say, that's great. Yeah, that's great that you're doing that now, but what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do when you really have to have a job? Or what are you going to do when you're actually in the real world? And I would say, well, I'm going to sell cars. And they would say, but I know you're going to sell cars, but what kind of job are you going to have? And there was in the back of my mind the idea, my dad and I have talked about it, that we were going to start a car dealership. So there was that thing, but it was always, I'm just going to sell cars. I know how to do it. I make good money doing it. I know how many cars I have to sell to pay my bills. In college, it was obviously less. If I would sell 2 cars a month, that's $3,000 to $4,000 profit. That's more money than a lot of people make doing other real jobs. So for me, that math made sense, and that's what I did the first year or two after college. From this flipping full-time period, I actually did morph into what my dad and I have talked about. We did end up starting an actual used car dealership. Now, this was a used car dealership that I had no equity in. This was all my dad's, but I was there from the ground level. I was there literally putting up the walls. Like, we had this metal frame building put up. We studded the building up. We had someone do the sheetrock, but we painted. I actually installed the tile floor myself. So I'm there from day one. And what I learned in this time frame was how to scale the car business. So basically, for me doing 1 car, for me doing 3 cars a month, for me doing 4 cars a month, you could do 15 cars a month. And I saw the mindset behind that. I learned the business behind that. And then I got to see actually how to do that. So I did that with my dad for probably 5 or 6 years. After that, I phased myself out of the business because I was still flipping cars on the side as I was running the business with him. And I kind of had that Chick-fil-A experience again. I'm looking at what I'm making there, which was good money. My dad paid me very well. He had actually given me a raise because I had been talking about leaving. He really wanted me to stay. But then I started looking at what I'm still making on the side flipping cars, and those numbers were pretty close. And I knew that if I was able to invest that 50 hours a week that I'm working at the dealership into my flipping, that I know that number could go up. So I did probably make one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, and that was to leave the family business, like this idea that my dad and I had had for a long time. It was awesome working with my dad. I wouldn't trade those 5 years for anything, but it was time for me to leave that business. When I did, we actually, my wife and I had been talking about moving because I had been throwing around the idea of starting my own used car dealership. The last thing I wanted to do was leave my dad's business and start one 5 miles up the road and be my dad's competition. I just didn't want to do that. I didn't feel like that would be the right decision. So we actually decided to move about 3 hours away, partly to be closer to my wife's family. We're in Raleigh, North Carolina now, so we're about halfway between my family and my wife's family, so it makes it a lot easier. I'm traveling, getting to see everybody. But for the first 2 year and a half, 2 years, I went back to flipping full-time out of my driveway again. And it was one of those things kind of took me back in time. I remembered when we first got married and doing it. I remembered going back to the Beetle, and just that's what I did. And I got to go back to that, and it was really good. From a family standpoint, we got to spend a ton of time together. Actually, it was to the point where my wife was like, you need to go do something. Like, you're here too much. Like, I can't get anything done in the house because you're always here playing with the kids. So I was starting to get that itch again, the business side of it. I also had 7 or 8 cars in the driveway at pretty much all times, which meant my wife couldn't actually get in the driveway at times to park. There would be wheels and parts and everything laying everywhere as I'm working on different cars at different times. So I made the decision to go ahead and start my own used car dealership. And as I'm starting the dealership, the great thing was I had all of the lessons that I learned from the Sega to the 73 Beetle to quitting Chick-fil-A to what I did working through college to flipping full-time the first time to starting the dealership with my dad and learning, all the things that I learned in that process to then flipping again full-time for those 2 years. I took all of that knowledge into what I'm doing now, actually where I am right now. We're inside my used car dealership right outside of downtown Raleigh. And I've taken everything I've learned and I've put it into this. So I've taken learning how to scale a business, learning how to work with outside mechanics, body people, how to find those people, knowing what to buy, knowing what not to buy, knowing the process. As I flipped full-time after leaving the dealership, that was when I was really able to hone the process, the car flipping process. For me, it's down to a science. I actually have in an email recently, we sent out that exact process. It's a process that the more times you go around it, the more money that you make. So I was really able to hone that process and basically take all of that and implement it into this business. And the results have been great. We've sold 3 cars this week so far. Off the top of my head, we've made just this week about $9,000. If you do the math there, obviously not every week is that great, but on weeks like this, it helps pay for the weeks that aren't as good. But what I've learned in the years of flipping has culminated into where I'm at now, and that's how I got from a Sega Genesis flip to owning and operating my own used car dealership. So if you have any questions about any of the steps or anything that I talked about in between, definitely feel free to contact me. You can comment below. If you are on YouTube, on the show notes page, you can send me an email at justin@thecarflip.com. That's today's episode. I look forward to seeing you in episode number 14.